Hello again, and welcome once more to Denton's Tales. This time, I am entering the realm of the paranormal, the supernatural, the Akashic record, spiritualism, or whatever other term you wish to use for things that go bump in the night once again. And as in part one, I'll be talking about actual events that occurred. Not to anonymous people reported on the back page of the Kicking Horse Gulch Gazette or some other rather less than mainstream media, such as those lurid tabloids that run stories like Elvis and Lord Lucan spotted on Waikiki Beach, that sort of thing. No, I'm talking about people I know, honest, reliable people whose stories I can vouch for. I can vouch for those people. If they say that these things happened, then they did. Now, how or why they happened, well, of course, that is quite another matter. But happen they did. After you hear these stories, well, make up your own mind as to the implications of them. To start with, a story from the end of the 19th century. A very personal story because it's from a family member. It was told to me by my maternal grandmother. Her name was Marion Charlotte, and she was staying with 3 cousins, visiting them for Easter. And the girls had, as was the custom then, purchased new hats. The Easter bonnet this is a big thing back then. Now, all 4 of them were sharing a large Victorian bed, one of those old sort of family-sized beds that you could put the entire family, including your cousins and just about anybody else, into. And the girls had put their Easter hats along the end of the bed, telling my grandmother that the lady would come in during the night to look at them. Now, she wondered why anyone would come in during the night to look at hats, but she thought no more about it. Maybe some sort of weird family custom or a visiting relative who was expected later, and she went to sleep. Now, she was woken by one of the girls shaking her. "She's here, the lady's here," the girl whispered. An elderly woman, dressed in the manner of decades earlier, but seemingly a normal-looking woman to all intents, walked up to the foot of the bed, and she began examining the hats. She looked at each hat in turn, moving along the end of the bed, bending down to examine each hat, and smiling up at the girls as she did so. Having looked at all the hats, she turned and moved to the door, and she went out without opening it. She just sort of vanished straight through the closed door. Now, surprised would be a bit of an understatement as far as my grandmother was concerned, but her cousins regarded it as a normal occurrence that they were quite used to and expected. The girls said, "Oh, she comes any time we get something new, and we leave it out for her to see." Now, this woman was not just a past memory of an event playing like a recording, like a DVD, you might say, going through the motions of something many years before, as many apparitions do seem to be, a previous event that you are simply witnessing as a sort of recording. No, she had conscious awareness. That is perfectly obvious. She was physically there in the room. She looked directly at each hat. She knew where each one was, and she smiled at the girls. She could see them. She knew where they were. She knew where they were. She could see their hats. This is quite obvious. She was real, and she was there with them at that moment. And, of course, she was, rather obviously dead. Yes, top that one, as they say. Now to a decidedly less pleasant experience. A friend of mine in the UK told me how she has been plagued for years by something, a demonic entity of some kind, presumably, scratching her and shaking her awake. And on one occasion, this, whatever it was, actually physically possessed her. Now I'll read what she wrote to me about this incident. She says, "I will share with you the most frightening. That's worth talking about. This isn't a vague memory. It's as clear as day. In my teens, I was subject to, shall we say, paranormal attacks. I was sensitive to the paranormal. So anyway, in my youthful years, I was living in South Wales at that time. One cold November evening, I was talking to my sister in her room, as girls do, when we both suddenly smelt a strong scent of blood. But it was me that was affected. I started to feel quite sick, nauseous even. I remember losing myself almost and going into a trance-like state. My sister witnessed everything. Her account is that I was pacing up and down the landing hallway and I kept looking into my room. She even states that my eyes changed from blue to a bright yellow. She can even recall that my facial structure changed, and it was evident that I was no longer me. I felt like I was being used, manipulated as if I were a puppet on a string. I felt a rage overcome me, but clearly wasn't my own emotion. It was a terrible rage. I remember floating outside my own body, as it were, and watching my physical body being toyed with. So anyway, I was quite clearly awake. I have no history of auditory hallucinations or schizophrenic episodes. This tale ends with my own voice in my conscious mind commanding me to kill my sister. As it so happens, there was a toolbox on the floor right next to me. At once I remember resisting the urge to pick up a wrench and murder my sister as I was commanded by this malicious entity. I assume that's what it was. I had to really fight back to gain control of my mind and body. My father threatened to get a priest to exorcise me in my bedroom. That concluded this rather bizarre event. Yes, so after this had all transpired, I had no memory of it. I was confused. The sickness did not leave me. I did not feel myself again until a few days after this. I had been plagued for many years by this demonic entity. Scratches would appear on my skin in front of my very eyes. How do you explain that rationally? How do you explain being shook awake while sleeping when there is clearly no one else in the room? She certainly had a point there. Now, I asked her if she still had problems with this entity and if she'd tried getting rid of it. And she said, yes, those things still torment me. Well, in the past, I used to sleep with the Bible next to my bed and read Bible verses aloud, and that seemed to do the trick. I would call upon the Archangel Michael to protect me. Yes, and it always targeted me for some reason. That's about as paranormal as it gets, getting temporarily possessed by a demonic being. What other explanation is there? The priest who visited me said the same. There is no rational explanation. My sister witnessed it all. She has a first-hand account of what happened to me. You can't simply write that off. I hoped to share this information at some point in my lifetime to help other people who might be suffering in the same way. I don't tell many people of what happened to me. I was very grateful for her openness in sharing that story with me. It's an amazing and quite frightening story. And as she says herself, there is no rational explanation for any of that. A paranormal or supernatural, if you prefer, explanation is the only one possible, as apparently the priest agreed. You know, you can't make scratches suddenly appear on yourself as you watch, nor shake yourself awake. And her sister's account, well, it's quite frightening. A friend of mine in the United States told me some very interesting things, one of them extremely frightening, but all certainly examples of the paranormal. They could hardly be anything else. To begin with, all her relatives died at 3:30 a.m., which is odd enough in itself, but she works as a care nurse, dealing often with elderly people, and those who have died on her shift have also done it at the same time. Coincidence? Bit of a stretch, really. Now, here's another thing. Her father had been ill. She had been helping to take care of him, and she was in bed in the early hours when she heard her brother's voice. Now, nothing very surprising about that, I suppose, hearing your brother's voice, except that since her brother had died sometime previously, hearing his voice, well, it certainly got her attention. He said, "Don't worry about Dad. He's coming to us. He'll be okay. You don't have to worry about Dad anymore. He's coming to us." Now, she thought she was awake, but she assumed she must have been asleep and dreaming. I mean, that would be most people's reaction, I'm sure, to that. But just minutes later, the phone rang. Her father had died a short time earlier. Again, coincidence? Well, it seems very unlikely. But now here's the really scary one. When she was still at school, she and a friend walked to her house from their school. They opened the door and they went inside. And on the stairs was a something. She described a black something which seemed to turn and be looking at them. Suddenly it went into the wall. It just melted right into the wall. But where it went in, the surface of the wall was sort of bubbling, moving, like it was just under the paintwork, moving around. This patch of movement in the wall then travelled right up along the stairs. They could see the bulge in the wall surface moving upwards and then across the ceiling. And it vanished into the wall on the other side. They were, well, a bit surprised by that, you might say, to put it very mildly, and they rushed back outside in a highly agitated state, and they stayed outside until somebody else came home, when they finally ventured back inside. I think that would unnerve most people. A very strange and worrying experience. I mean, what's black and travels inside walls? Nothing good, I'm quite sure. Another American friend had a rather curious and unnerving set of experiences, culminating in a nighttime climax in a cemetery, rather reminiscent of one of those old Beam horror movies. And in her case, a Native American sacred site may have been involved in some way. She was staying with her ex, and there had been strange things going on in the house, like doors opening at night by themselves, windows being slammed shut, and the kitchen being all messed up every morning. And they felt a sort of darkness, as she described it, around them. But then things got very strange indeed. She says, I'll read verbatim what she said. We went downstairs. The dogs were barking and running in circles. It was before I took the photos. The dogs were downstairs barking like crazy. My son was doing push-ups and sorts of. I took pictures of that. Afterwards, I found that there were orbs all around him, many of different colours and shapes. Some had been blue or green, and others were yellow and red. After I started to take the pictures, that's when it all started. It was a heck of a feeling, like light energy all around us. Even the dogs were going crazy. There were shapes in the photos, one like a person sitting on a chair beside the stereo, another was shaped like a dog. We then got a hold later the next day of a lady with sage. She came into the house to get the spirits out. We had this mirror hung on the wall. It had been there for many years, my ex said, before he bought the house. We found out that the house was on a native ground, that it should not have been built on it. Now, she told us to take the mirror out because it trapped souls, to get rid of it. Then she left, driving her car backwards and honking her horn 3 times to ward off spirits. We then, around 1 a.m., took the mirror down, and we took it to a cemetery. We placed it on a Jesus statue and read a verse from the Bible. We turned 3 times clockwise, and all of a sudden, to our surprise, the mirror cracked 3 times. There was no wind. Well, we didn't want to stay, so we ran frantically away to the car, tripping over ourselves, and rode off. I asked her if things in the house changed after that. She continues, yes, it did. The doors that opened at night stayed shut. The kitchen wasn't a mess the next morning, and the windows weren't slammed shut. The darkness that we felt was gone. Holy shit, that's a crazy experience. Wish I still had all those photos. I wish she had them too. But this case is quite an interesting one, because the occurrences, the doors, the windows, etc., were seen and heard by more than one person, proving they were not subjective. They were actual happenings. The same applies to what happened later. The dogs clearly were aware of it, and explanations like mass hysteria are not relevant. I mean, dogs don't get mass hysteria. And there were the photographs, plus the mirror. You know, it hardly cracked itself, and did it the same number of times that they turned around. They turned 3 times, the mirror cracked 3 times. That would be taking coincidence a wee bit far, I think. Whatever all of that was, that it happened, that it was real, is undeniable, though one, of course, could speculate till the cows come home, as they say, without reaching a conclusion as to how or why. But to continue, she told me of another experience, and I quote, Yes, I had one where I thought I was dreaming, but felt something sitting on my bed. I tried to turn the light on, but I couldn't move. I panicked, tried to kick, but couldn't. It was getting very cold in my room. This black looked like smoke appeared, like a shape of a man or something. It got up and went to the side of my bed. Started to shake. The bed started to shake. Again, I tried moving, but couldn't. I closed my eyes and said, please leave. I opened my eyes, and to my surprise, it was gone. That was shortly before we found that my cousin Tommy had passed. I feel it could have been of him. She goes on. At times his picture on the wall gets knocked off, and I hear him laughing at times. Rather odd. I feel he had lots more to do here before he moved on. It has a good nail, but it just drops off. She told me that when the picture falls, she often hears her brother laughing, and it happens around 3:15 a.m., which is probably the time of his death by suicide, based on the time he was found and the medical examination that was conducted. Now, this is beyond imagination or coincidence. The same time of the occurrence is proof enough of that. It is not something random. There seems a purpose to it. The combination of the picture falling for no reason and his laughter would indicate, well, it would indicate an intent. Now to quite a series of strange incidents from a friend in Iowa. The house was spiritually active, you could say. Things in the kitchen would drop off shelves or out of cupboards for no reason. And there was a collection of very heavy shot glasses on a shelf. Very thick, strong glasses that didn't break easily, nor would they move easily. But they kept falling off the shelf. She would hear a plop, and there would be a shot glass lying there. One night it could be this glass, the next night it might be that one. But they regularly fell, and there was no vibration causing it, since nobody was moving near them, nor were they too light to be affected by it. They would hear the sound of them falling, but they weren't in the kitchen when they did, and there was no slope on the shelf even that would explain glasses randomly falling off. For some reason, she felt herself drawn to the Cailleach, and for those who are saying, the what? A word of explanation is required. The Cailleach, the Irish spelling, the Irish spelling is Cailleach, which translates as the hag or simply the old woman, and she's also known as the veiled one, was a spirit of ancient pre-Christian Celtic Ireland, usually regarded as a veiled old woman with one eye, able to create storms and leap across mountains. Rather a athletic ability for an old hag, actually, and seen as a seasonal creature, ruling the winter months from Samhain on the 1st of November to Beltane on the 1st of May, and as May Day approached, she was particularly active. She represents the hag or crone archetype found in many cultures, and it's been suggested that she was recreated, if you like, by the Celtic warrior culture as a spirit of war, another personification of the great goddess the Morrigan. In Celtic legend, she would not have been regarded as a particularly friendly spirit, but my friend felt her presence not as an evil entity in any way, more of a humorous one, in fact, one who played tricks, and she would turn the lights on and off or switch on the TV set or things like that. And her actual presence in the room seems to be proven by the fact that my friend would say, "Are you here, Cailleach? If you're here, show me," and the TV set would switch itself on, which she took as a yes. I think any suggestion of coincidence in that case is clearly an impossibility, and TV sets do not switch themselves on whenever they may fancy doing so. My friend asked a question and something answered it. But in one instant, just recently, things were a little different. And she says, "When I was talking to a friend about the Cailleach, she came to my room and turned on my TV without me prompting her to do so. I didn't call on her, I was just talking about her. She usually, when I call upon her using a breaching charm, she turns my TV on and off to validate to me that she's amongst me. But today she turned my TV on without me calling on her, and my grandson witnessed it and freaked out. I could feel her presence, and her presence scared my grandson." So here again we have a witness to an event. Her grandson saw it happen and felt it. But we must ask, why would my friend feel this connection to a spirit of ancient Irish folklore, regardless of whether or not it was actually the Cailleach herself or something else using her name? Well, that's impossible to say. But that something turned the TV or the lights on and off, and did it on request, you could say, is undeniable. You know, an electrical fault would hardly occur to order, nor would it affect both the lights and the TV set. They are not connected, and both require a switch or a button to be manually activated, which neither the TV nor the lights are really able to do for themselves. To my mind, if you ask something to let you know it's there, and then your TV set turns on, well, that's a very clear yes. If you have a better explanation, well, I'd love to hear it. But to my mind, there really isn't one. When she was 13 years old, her grandfather, who had died a year previously, appeared to her, holding his hand out and seemingly trying to speak, but no words came out. She said he brought a warmth with him into the room, like he radiated a warmth. But when he touched her arm, she felt intense cold, and his hand went straight through her arm. He wasn't solid, which I suppose was to be expected. Why he appeared, I have no idea. It certainly doesn't seem to have accomplished anything, apart from the fact that he did. When she was about 27, 28 years old, she was sitting at her computer when a little boy, about 3 years old, ran out of the dining room, across the room where she was sitting, and into the playroom. Now, she was quite surprised, since there wasn't supposed to be anyone else there, and she couldn't find any trace of the boy when she looked for him. So she phoned her mother, who was absent at the time, and she said, "Mom, there's a little boy running around the house. He's about 3 years old, but I can't find him." Her mother said, "Oh, that's your brother Jerry. He had sudden infant death syndrome, and he died when he was 3 years old. But he never left the house. He stayed there." She apparently didn't see anything unusual at all in that. But now, things get very dark indeed, quite literally in this case. There was a door leading from the front room to the attic, one of several doors in the house that did so, and this door would open by itself. But nobody could close it because they couldn't get near it when it was open. They had to wait until it shut itself. There was what she called a darkness coming from it, an actual feeling of evil darkness that was ice cold. It simply drove them back. And there would be a figure standing just inside the door, a hooded figure in a robe, almost like a medieval monk with his cowl pulled up over his head. But he had no feet, and he was hovering above the floor. Now, they put salt across the floor in front of the door, among other things. It seemed to keep the whatever it was inside. And, of course, nobody ever tried to open the door when it was shut. I wouldn't have walked through that door for all the gold in Fort Knox. I think a very notable feature of all these experiences is the fact that they cannot be explained by normal, everyday causes, nor are there any scientific reasons for them. They all fit very correctly into the realm of the paranormal or the supernatural, events beyond any possibility of an obvious natural explanation. Nor does coincidence play a role. And here's an example of that concerning my now 4-year-old granddaughter, who was just 3 at the time of these experiences. She was in my daughter's house, which is just across the road from my own, and she was looking intently at a particular part of the room where there was a table, seemingly watching and reacting to something there. When she was asked what she was doing, she said, "Gan." Now, that was her word for her grandmother, my wife, her version of granny. Then she suddenly clammed up, and she wouldn't say anything more. Now, on the table happened to be a little wooden box containing my wife's ashes, she having died some months previously from underlying conditions that caused COVID complications. But my granddaughter had no idea what the box was or what was in it. She hadn't been told what the box contained. It was just a box. You hardly say to a 3-year-old, "Hey, guess what? Granny's in that box." Yeah. No. Coincidence that she would see her grandmother while just happening to be looking at the box containing her ashes, and then behave like perhaps she'd been told to say nothing, her sudden change of manner, not wanting to say anything further? But there's more. There's more, with a striking similarity. Her cot was in my daughter's bedroom, and she kept mentioning the man in the hat. And this man in the hat would tell her to be good and stay in her cot when her mother might leave the room. She would say, he was waving at her, telling her to stay where she was and be good. And one of the places she pointed to where the man in the hat was standing was where her recently deceased uncle's ashes were kept. The box containing his ashes was exactly in the spot she pointed to. And he had been a police officer, so of course he wore a hat. Shown a photograph of him, a man she had never actually seen, she said, "I know him." And she actually used the word uncle on one occasion, a word she didn't know. Now, who told her that? again, coincidence? She just happens to be looking at a spot where someone's ashes are kept, which she knew nothing about, and sees something that fits those ashes, and uses a term that she'd never heard that also fits them. I would love to hear someone explain that by anything other than her having actually seen something. And before someone says, she overheard him mentioned, his name would not have been used, or his title, I'd say, would not have been used by family members. His name was always used. His name, not uncle. He was never referred to using that title, nor would any mention have been made of where the ashes were, nor indeed what they were. I think that is quite interesting. So that concludes this further look into the realm of the paranormal, the supernatural, the weird and the wonderful, or whatever else you may wish to term it. Till the next time, I shall say goodbye for now. And I hope you will be able to sleep peacefully tonight, with the light turned off. I really do. Oh, yes. But remember, the half-glimpsed shadow out the corner of your eye. That squeak like someone stepping on the loose board on the stairs. The conversation you thought you heard in the unoccupied room till you open the door and find there's no one there. All that may not be a product of your imagination. Oh no, it may be perfectly real. And there may indeed be someone or something there with you, in your house, at this very moment. Sleep well. I really hope that you do. Goodbye.